Welcome to the Startups Roundtable podcast, where we discuss the science and art of startups with founders and the broader startup community. I'm Tony Hackett, and I've spent over a third of my B2B sales career either working for early stage startups or as a go-to-market and social selling mentor for founders and their teams. In each episode, we will explore various topics, including decision-making, team building, and growth strategies. Before we meet today's guest, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. Here in Sydney, it's the Gadigal people. We pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending today. Today, I am joined by John Roulac, a hemp innovator, serial entrepreneur, investor, philanthropist, writer, and champion of regenerative agriculture. John has a wealth of business creation experience and is the founder of Nutiva, an organic superfoods brand with over $1 billion in retail sales. Today, he is an investor, supporter, and advisor to various companies and organizations in the better for you and planet sector. John is also an executive producer of the Netflix blockbuster Regenerative Agriculture film Kiss the Ground, narrated by Woody Harrelson. Lots to discuss, so let's get started. John, thanks very much for joining me today. And the Startups Roundtable is an environment where we get to speak with founders and people from that community. And when I look at what it is that you're doing as a mature startup in some ways, but there's so much reinvention that seems to go on with what you're doing and how you approach life and your ventures. I wonder if I could just ask you to kick us off by a little bit of your background and what you're up to right now.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate having me on. Yeah, my name is John Roulac. I was born and raised in Southern California. At a young age, I was blessed that my mom and dad purchased a small island that they would, with no running water, no electricity, in Washington State next to Canada. And that made a major impression on me and the environment. So then as a young man, they dumped nuclear waste near my house when I was age 21. That kind of set me off in a kind of my life's journey for the last many decades of how do we live on this planet in a more sustainable, what I like to use the term regenerative way. Conserving, I remember I think back in 1987, I started a company called Harmonious Technologies. Our tagline was conserving resources to improve quality of life. And that kind of, you could put a lot of the projects that I've been working on since then under that banner and trying to work with mainstream society to see that protecting nature is a good business. Unfortunately, that isn't kind of how the planet operates, for better or worse. One of the things I did was I made 500 hemp bars back in 1999 as a food company. Didn't have any idea really where it would go. I called it Nutiva, the nut of sativa. It was a hemp seed company. And that worked out pretty well and ended up adding coconut oil. And we sold over $1 billion worth of organic foods, 20 years, 10 years in a row, Inc. magazine, fastest growing companies. And then I stepped down as CEO 4 years ago. And I have a foundation that I support projects. I put a third of my assets in that I give away, and we're doing food forests in East Africa and Guatemala. And then I also support entrepreneurs in different projects and write articles, and also produce a movie called Kiss the Ground. So I was very blessed to have a success in business, and I look to take some of those resources and knowledge and all the mistakes that I made, plenty of mistakes, to what I work on today.
Hey, John, first of all, congratulations on the movie. I've watched it. It is a remarkable production. And in fact, as I was watching that and just listening to you introduce us today, I wondered how you prioritize. There's so many things that are important that you could put all of your time and energy into. How do you go about working out what to do on a certain day and what you have to let go?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. How do you stay focused, organized? I don't know. I used to. Somehow when I was a CEO, I was more focused, and now I'm semi-retired. It's like, well, let's see. I only have one Zoom call today. What do I want to do? But I really follow what I'm passionate about, what I'm interested, and then I create projects around that. I wanted to change the food system, so I built a food company to introduce hemp, to the world. I tend to do a lot of reading, a little too much time on social media, but I tend to read a lot of information, share it on social, and learn. I think that's the one thing that I've seen a lot of successful entrepreneurs and leaders, no matter what you're doing. It's just a constant learning to, understand to learn. So I like to learn new subjects. Right now, I've had to learn about agroforestry and food forests. And we've set up 2,000 food forests working with groups in Guatemala and East Africa. That was one of my startups this last year. It's a nonprofit project. So yeah, learning is important.
It's interesting you talk about mid-'80s, late '80s when you started, and obviously technology's advanced enormously. I mean, look at us today. But if you were to consider the elements of technology that are helping you achieve what you're trying to achieve now, are there one or two that you'd say are really supporting you more than others? And can you see one area maybe that really could make a difference in that short to medium term?
You're talking about technologies to learn or to
Well, actually more to scale. Sorry, I should have been more specific. Yeah, because you've got a massive scaling opportunity, which you've wrestled to the ground and it's going to continue to be there.
Yeah. I mean, there's one tool. I don't use it now quite as much, but I always tell I invest in businesses and advise entrepreneurs. I'm a big fan of Slack. And I started up a hemp CBD company about 3 years ago. And I really don't think I could have organized it so well without it. I really, it's basically just organized texting. It allows you to, if you set up the categories right, your team can communicate with each other, but basically you got to say no emails. I don't know, like you can't send any emails in between in company. And then the CEO or whichever department you're running, you just can look and you can see what everyone else is doing. So that's very effective. So I'm a big fan of Slack. And then I think Monday.com is another tool that is low cost. It can serve as a CRM. It's can put list your tasks that you're doing. It's kind of like a Swiss Army knife for organizing things. End of the day, people do business with people, and people like to do business with people that they like to hang out with or be around. And that's a challenge for entrepreneurs. We want to get shit done. And we sometimes are frustrated being around people who don't get shit done. And not everybody is going to be at the same speed or intensity as the entrepreneur. And so working on your own self, your own leadership, I think is really important. I definitely wasn't very good at running a company when I was in my 30s or even early 40s. And, I would say I was maybe good at certain things. And then I had to overcome some of the other things. But maybe we should talk a little about some of the things that I was good at and that I think can help organizations. One is focus on the why. I mean, how many people want to get up in the morning and look at a computer screen for hour after hour after hour and be in meetings and deal with little numbers and things on the computer screen and do it for hours and hours and then deal with people that they don't want to respect or whatever. People don't really want to do that. But if you can focus as a company leader on the why, and for us as the Nutiva, the food company that I founded, our focus was to revolutionize the way the world eats. So yeah, we did sell organic food. We put coconut oil in a jar, but a lot of people sold coconut oil in a jar. Why were we the number one? Well, one, I worked really hard to make sure we had the best tasting coconut oil. I made sure we had it in different sizes. I made sure we try to be in stock as much as we could. But we also gave back and planted 100,000 coconut seedlings to our small farmers there. And so by having a mission, a kind of a rallying cry to revolutionize the way the world eats, I would be giving talks and lectures. People would invite me to come and talk at places. Well, most food CEOs that doesn't happen always. But because I wrote articles and eventually, made this movie, that was a difference. So, and people like that. I think if you talk to some of my team, they may say, well, John, maybe he wasn't the best manager. Maybe he tried to do too many things. I would zig when we maybe should have been not quite, maybe we should have zagged a little more before I went to the zig move, kind of, as a metaphor. When you're the entrepreneur and there's 1 or 5 people, it's easy to do. When I had 120 people, it's a different thing. But, they like that. And then the other thing is culture. I just had an intuitive sense. I remember reading when I was at about 15 people, and I was freaked out. I said, we're going to have 100 people in our company and I'm not going to know who they are. I won't even know. I wouldn't have even hired them. Other people would have hired them, and they may not even like our culture. They won't even like we're doing. They won't even know it. And they're going to be in charge of representing the company. That just freaked me out. So I went and tried to find people who are really good at company culture and got some help with that. And we got people into a room and tried to describe what our values were. But part of it was I think it's really important. It's no assholes allowed, sorry for the French.
It makes sense. I know what
Yeah.
you're saying.
And the other thing that worked really well was we really created a good environment especially for women and BIPOC women. I remember that's probably some of the things I feel the most proud about. And because we had that, they were felt safe and respected. They performed really well. And it's like, we hired a young woman. She worked at Taco Bell. I didn't hire somebody else in the team hired her. And we saw she was like pretty, she was smart. So she started counting inventory. None of her family had ever gone to college. She ended up working 6 years for us and ended up leaving at $100,000 a year, huge success. And she was very smart. And she was like 25 years old. And most people, they would go, you mean you're going to let someone who works at Taco Bell at 23 have management responsibilities? That would not happen in most companies. They would give it to the older white guy. And we hired another woman, another Latina woman. She was afraid to even use her name, Maria, because she thought in her last company that they would tease her about her name and her Latina name. She didn't get any of that. And she really grew, and she ended up running our quality assurance department. We had leadership training where we would take our people, and like once a week, they would come for an hour and they would learn, how do you give feedback? What's your management style? That kind of thing. So the culture is very important. And so people really liked working there. Did we have to do some layoffs? Did we have some huge challenges? But I felt that the culture, somebody said culture trumps strategy anytime. And so those are a couple things that I think we did well, and encourage, other entrepreneurs to focus as much as they can on that as well.
John, you hit on a couple of points that really matter to me. Diversity and inclusion is something that is spoken about a lot and can be enacted more. And with it, you hit on what I think is one of the really central pieces around. It's about confidence. How can we help each other turn up with the confidence to participate with our full self? And I use it's a poor example, but an example I use in the technology industry is if everybody talks about cloud, and if you're away from the workplace for a year and you come back and you're sitting in a meeting room, people start talking about cloud. You could doubt whether you know what's really going on. And you'll have the same knowledge as the people who've been there for the last year while you've been out of the workforce. So how do we help people bring that confidence through? I think that's such an important element. And where you spoke about culture and about the why. There's also, it's a book I read, I'm going to say it's 15 years ago or so, and it's called The Intention Economy. And it is about us being able to bring our intention forward rather than just being reliant on somebody else to grab our attention. So it's about having ownership and responsibility to actually engage. But culture creates the environment for that. And that's a really interesting point that you make about as organizations get larger, and how do they start to think through the nuances of team construction and having a real feel for the further flung network in their organization. And you do it across geographies. What sort of complexity does that bring for you? That's tough enough for 100 people, single building, single office, single precinct.
Back then, mostly everybody was under one roof except for our salespeople. Nowadays, that's different. And I think it's extremely hard. I mean, one of the things I enjoyed was just getting out of my desk from, meetings and dealing with lawyers and investors and what have you, regulatory, the things that you started to have to focus on where you didn't when you were a smaller company, and just walk around. I would go into the accounting room. I couldn't necessarily help them do a better job. I wasn't a financial expert. I would just go and crack some jokes, and, they're all hardworking there. And, they, like somebody comes in, at least, the leadership knows that they exist and, acknowledges what you're doing. Hey, thank you hey, looks like we're going to close this month on time. Thank you. I know that's really important. I know our bankers are going to like that, what have you. So walking around, and just in the different departments and saying hello, I think is important. Some people just stay right in their office, and people can kind of pick up on. I mean, some people are more personable than others, and it's not like I related to everybody, The other funny thing was I found out that I heard people were intimidated by me. When there's 5 people in the company, you're the founder and you're working with them. But then when there's 50 or 100, because of society and whatever, you're making more money, you're this position. So that was interesting. It was in whatever they could think how you were feeling, they would pick up oh, is John doing okay today? What did John say? Like it was like everything was like more of like a stage. I thought that was took me a while to like, wow, that's that was interesting. Yeah.
Decision making is something I've got a real fascination around, and the data and intuition continuum. How do you view that, and how's that changed?
I can just think of one of my good buddies who I appointed CEO when I stepped down. And, he and we dealt with different people, different views. Like when I decided to go with coconut oil, which we weren't selling coconut oil, and now it's like coconut is like in the company. And again, I'm not really, I'm no longer CEO. I'm not really involved much. I'm a small shareholder, but coconut oil is 50% plus of our sales. I didn't do a study to determine whether I should go into coconut oil. What I noticed was people would call me up and we had hemp oil and I would tell them about hemp oil. But I said, well, hemp oil's, it's really a drizzling oil. You don't really cook with it like in a hot pan. And they said, well, what should I, since you're kind of a health food guy, and what would you use? And then I told them about coconut oil. I said, but it's hard to get really good coconut oil. And there's some person, but they don't really have a website. And this is like, 2003, I'm telling the story. And they said, oh, that's interesting. And after I told that story about 20 times, people are asking me, what should I cook with? And I tell them that, I just said, maybe I should do coconut oil. But the larger up, so it's a balance between data and intuition. I mean, Stephen Jobs didn't introduce the iPhone based on a market study. Okay. The one thing that I would recommend is if you do have an idea, is to go out and get feedback, even for the entrepreneur or team, go out and talk to your customers. Like one of the things that I would do is I would have a demo. I'd be demoing a product, and then I take the new product we're going to introduce, and I do it on the side. I wasn't. If you ask the natural food store, they'd say, "Hopefully, you can't do that. We're not selling here." But I just have it under the table. I just say, "Why don't you try this?" They'd say, "Oh, that tastes good. Well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that name?" So I think it's important, and again, getting out in the field, whatever product it is, to do that. I think, and then you can get a sense. As you get larger, you need to use data, because a small mistake when you're a $1 million company is different, whereas you're a $50 million company, a small mistake can be, very expensive. So it's a balance, and you have to be a risk taker, but it's important I think it's combination. It's intuition and using data.
I think about data as, I kind of like it a little bit, but it can be a crutch, and it can be a crutch that can hum things down rather than accelerate. And it is being able to bring that blend, I think, as you pointed out, of being able to understand there is data, but being able to bring that knowledge and experience to the fore. Building teams is something that you touched on a moment ago. I just want to come back to that for a sec. And the idea of a startup, and I'm sure you can reflect back to earlier days for yourself. How would you approach building out teams and thinking about teams now if you were a 10-person organization today in this moment, and just tapping into a couple of the learnings that you've picked up over the time?
I used to go to these conferences for like fast growing companies. And there was a guy who was the CEO of I'm trying to remember what the name of it is. It's like contractors for hire. You can hire independent contractors around the world. They were based in San Jose. They went through a couple name changes, but he described that there's 3 phases that business entrepreneurs go through. The first phase is you're in the jungle with machete. So the people you hire, you don't want to hire someone who is good at working at a $1 billion organization. So you need someone there's a problem here. I hired a guy I would call him my machete guy. He could jump on the forklift. He could talk to the distributor. He could talk to a customer, and he could do all of that. He was a machete guy. Then at a certain point, you have to leave that. And the next phase is you need to leave the jungle and you need to get on a 4-wheel drive, and you're going to drive down like a dirt road. But the machete guy was not that person for me. And so I had to let that person go. And then I hired someone, that would be better on, to driving a 4-wheel drive. And you're still going to be it's kind of a little ad-libbing, but if you don't pay too much attention, you could go off the road, but you could go off the road a little. And then you get to a point, and then that can be good. Then you get to a point maybe where, different businesses could be different levels. It could be 50 million, it could be 100 million a year. And then you're on the Autobahn. And imagine on the steering wheel at the Autobahn at 120 miles an hour. And you go, oh, I could do this. I could introduce this product, or I could do something and a slight move wipe out the company. And each of those three phases requires different people. And one of the hardest things for the entrepreneur when you're going through that is the people who helped you get to that next level, who put in their blood, sweat, and tears. If you get that they're not that person to take you to that next level because they don't have that skill set, it's hard to say we're going to have to part ways. And, maybe there's an opportunity for you to go somewhere else. And that's, when people get upset and your team's, why'd you let Frank go? And that's where leadership isn't always so fun. It's a little lonely at the top, but that's part of that. And at the end of the day, if you keep that person and they're not good at that phase, they're going to impact others. And it's going to be, so it's really best for the organization and ultimately better for that person to find that next level. But we're not dealing with robots. We're dealing with people and humans and the struggle. And, we spend more time with people at work than people spend sometimes with their wives or partners.
John, it's an unplanned, almost perfect segue into a question I'd like to close with, and it's around mentors and coaches. And if you were sitting with some new founders with their startups just underway now, and they're looking for advice on how to go about looking for mentors and coaches, what would be a couple of tips that you would share?
That's a great question. I think it helps. I just think overall it helps for people who've been around, they know what's coming around the bend. So having those around, when you're 30 or 40, you think you know what you're talking about. You look at Steve Jobs, he's a pretty smart guy, did a pretty amazing. Well, he made some mistakes and learned. So it's like, everyone can learn. So I think it's important to find mentors or coaches that you relate to, that can be honest and direct with you. I think a lot of times people candy coat things. I get a critique that I'm too direct with people. They say, John, we agree with what you're saying, but maybe you could just say it in a nicer way. I tend to be rather direct, not necessarily hateful, and I think that's part of also leadership is learning. I had a mentor once and he told me, he says, John, what's the point of communication? I said, I don't know. What is it? He says, to achieve a desired outcome. So, he says, well, you need to use the bologna sandwich method. So you sit down with someone who reports to you. You spend a couple minutes chit-chatting. How's your day going? Hey, I noticed this is what you've been doing. This is really good. I got feedback from somebody on your team. They really liked that. Thanks for doing that. That's the kind of things we need to show. Oh, and by the way, and then the thing that you want them to do that maybe they didn't do or didn't need to do better, deliver that and kind of just versus, hey, look, you've really been messing up and, you should really be better. And here's what I need you to do. They're going to take it a little differently. Again, I think working on your own leadership skills is really important. And if you can be around mentors and coaches to help you, definitely important. And mental health is such an issue today. But, for me, health is really important. I have one tip that I recommend people do, and that's to do that plank, the yoga plank every day. You can start out with 15 or 20 seconds a day. It really helps your core. And if you're sitting, traveling a lot, it definitely helps your overall health and be a better person. So that's one health tip I have.
John, really well-balanced considerations around mentoring and coaching and building in that mental health. That's a great point to make as well. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today. And I know that we haven't even scratched the surface of your life's journey and experiences, but you've been really generous in sharing what you have with me on the podcast. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate the invite, and you have a good rest of your day as well.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Feedback is always welcome, and I would appreciate introductions to potential future guests to invite onto the podcast. But that's it for today. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.